Sir, I'm going to need you to step outside. This isn't the kind of place you're looking for. She said it with a smile, the kind of smile that has learned to be polite while delivering something that isn't polite at all. The man she was talking to looked at her for a moment. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just nodded once, very slightly, and said, "I'd actually just like to look at a car." She laughed, not loudly, just enough. "I think you'd be more comfortable somewhere else," she said. "There's a used lot about 6 blocks north. They'll take care of you there." What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the man standing in front of her in worn jeans and a canvas jacket had quietly invested 20% of the building they were all standing in. And he had a very good memory. It was a Wednesday morning in late September, and the Cascade Motor Group showroom on 5th Avenue in Portland, Oregon was doing what it always did at 10 in the morning, performing. That's the only word for it. Performance. The floors were so polished you could see yourself in them. The cars sat at precisely calculated angles, their bodies catching the light, the way jewelry catches light in a display. Music played at a volume specifically chosen to feel aspirational without being distracting. Every staff member moved with the practiced ease of people who have been told, many times, that they represent a brand and who have internalized that instruction in ways that are not always. Keanu Reeves had parked 2 blocks away, not because he was hiding, not because he was testing anyone or planning anything. He'd parked 2 blocks away because the lot was full and he didn't want to circle. He was in Portland for 3 days, staying at a small hotel near the river, and he needed a vehicle for an extended road trip. He was planning through the Pacific Northwest. Nothing, just a car. Something reliable, comfortable on long stretches, ideally with decent trunks. He walked in wearing what he always wore when he wasn't working or expected anywhere. Dark jeans, a gray canvas jacket that had been on enough trips to look lived in rather than styled. No watch, a single bag over one shoulder. His hair was loose, slightly past his ears. He hadn't shaved in a few days. He looked, to someone doing a fast visual assessment, like someone who had wandered in from somewhere else. The woman who approached him first was named Sandra Briggs. She was 34, sharp, ambitious in the way that specific environments produce. The kind of ambition that has learned to measure everything by its surface because surfaces are what the environment. She had been top sales associate at Cascade Motor Group for 2 consecutive years. She was good at reading rooms. She read this one wrong. "Good morning," she said, the professional warmth already sliding toward something thinner. "Can I help you find something?" "Just looking around," Keanu said. "I'm interested in something for a long drive. Something comfortable on highways." Sandra's eyes did the thing they sometimes did, a quick, involuntary sweep of a person that takes about a second and a half and arrives at conclusions that take considerably longer to unlearn. She saw the jacket, the bag, the jeans with the wear at the knees. "Of course," she said, with the specific courtesy of someone who has decided to be professionally kind rather than genuinely helpful. "Our entry-level vehicles are actually in. I can walk you through those if you like. Or," she smiled, "there's a very well-reviewed pre-owned dealership about 6 blocks from here. They carry a wonderful selection." Keanu looked at her steadily. "I'd like to look at what you have here," he said. Sandra kept the smile. "Absolutely. The entry level." "What's that one?" He gestured toward a vehicle in the center of the showroom floor, a dark gray touring sedan, the flagship of the brand's current lineup. 114,000. It caught light the way expensive things do. Sandra hesitated for just a beat too long. "That's the Meridian Touring Edition. It's our flagship. It's quite a significant investment." A pause. "Perhaps I could show you something more in your range." Keanu was quiet for a moment. "What range do you think that is?" he asked. The question landed cleanly. Sandra's smile held, but something behind it shifted. "I just want to make sure you're looking at something practical," she said. "I appreciate that," Keanu said, "but I came to look at cars, not to be managed." A man had appeared near the edge of the showroom floor. His name was Darren Webb, the floor manager, a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, whose entire professional identity had calcified around a particular way of assessing value. Quickly, visually, and with remarkable confidence in conclusions that he had never once... He had watched the exchange from across the showroom with the narrowed focus of someone who has decided what's happening. Before it has finished happening. He walked over with the unhurried authority of a man who considers himself the final word on most subjects. "Everything all right over here?" he said, addressing Sandra rather than... "This gentleman was just looking around," Sandra said. Darren turned to Keanu with an expression that was technically a smile. "Can I ask what brings you in today?" "I'm looking to buy a car," Keanu said. "Great," Darren said. "What's your budget?" He asked it the way someone asks a question they already have an answer prepared for. "I haven't decided yet," Keanu said. "I'd like to see the Meridian Touring." Darren looked at him. "The jacket, the bag, the jeans. That's a significant vehicle," he said. $114,000. "We'd need to talk about financing before we spend time on a full walkthrough." "I'd be paying cash," Keanu said. Darren's expression didn't change exactly, but something in it recalibrated into something more openly doubtful. "Okay," he said. "Well, we'd still need some preliminary verification before we pull a vehicle of that level off the floor. Standard procedure." He glanced at Sandra. "Why don't you set him up in the back with the Compass series?" "That's a beautiful vehicle. Very proud." Sandra nodded. She looked briefly at Keanu with something that might have been apology if it had been allowed to develop, and then redirected it back into professionalism. "If you'll follow me." Keanu didn't follow. "No, thank you," he said simply and without heat. "I think I'll take a few minutes on my own." Darren straightened slightly. "Sir, I need to ask you to." "I'm not going to damage anything," Keanu said. "I'm just going to look at a car. That's what this room is for." There was a pause. The kind of pause that contains a lot of calculation happening very quickly. "I think," Darren said, his voice dropping to something that was meant to sound reasonable but didn't, "that you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. There are plenty of dealerships in Portland that carry great vehicles at every price point. I can write down a couple of recommendations." And there it was. The moment said out loud. Finally, what had been in the room since the first assessment? Keanu looked at Darren Webb for a long moment. Then he said, "You've decided I can't afford to be here." Darren opened his mouth. "Based on what I'm wearing," Keanu continued, "that's it. That's the whole thing. I walked in wearing jeans and you decided the rest of it." "Sir, I'm just trying to manage everyone's time efficiently. You told me to go somewhere else, twice. And now you're asking me to leave." He paused. "I'd like to speak with whoever is above you." Darren's jaw tightened. "I'm the floor manager. I handle above you," Keanu said again. Calm, patient, absolutely not moving. The thing about that kind of calm is what it does to a room. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It simply exists, steady, unhurried, immovable, and the room rearranges around it the way water rearranges around some... There were 4 other people in the showroom at that point. 2 were customers. One was a junior sales associate named Marcus, 26 years old, 3 months into his first job in automotive. One was a detail technician named Phil, who had come in from the back to drop off some paperwork, and was now standing very still near the doorway, watching. Marcus had been near the back of the room for most of the exchange. He had heard all of it. He had watched Sandra's first assessment, watched Darren arrive and make his determination, watched the escalation toward what was now a man being asked to leave a showroom for the crime of wearing... He was doing the specific internal calculation that people do when they are new to a job and witness something wrong. The calculation that weighs what they know, is right against what their environment tells them is safe, and tries to find a path between the two that doesn't cost them everything. He found one. He walked over, not to Darren, not to Sandra, to Keanu. "Sir," he said, "I'm Marcus. Can I show you the Meridian Touring?" Darren turned his head sharply. "Marcus." "I'm a sales associate," Marcus said, keeping his voice even and his gaze on Keanu. "It's my job to show cars to customers. This is a customer." A silence. Keanu looked at Marcus. Something in his expression shifted. Barely, just enough to register. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition. I'd appreciate that, Keanu said. Marcus showed he did it properly. He talked about the engine, the touring suspension, the adaptive cruise, the trunk capacity that Keanu had specifically. He answered questions directly and without the particular condescension of someone who has decided the person they're talking to can't really understand the answers. Darren watched from across the floor with an expression that was doing a lot of work, trying to contain several things at once. Sandra stood near the reception desk and did not look at anyone. 20 minutes later, Keanu thanked Marcus and said he'd think about it. He left his contact information and walked out. The showroom returned to its normal tempo. Darren went to his office. Marcus went back to his desk. Nothing happened until the next morning. The email arrived at 7:42 a.m. to the corporate inbox of Apex Automotive Partners, the holding group that owned and operated Cascade Motor Group and 11 other dealerships across the Pacific. It came from a private address, and the subject line read simply, Cascade, Portland, yesterday. The body was It identified the sender as a member of the investment group that held a 20% equity stake in Apex Automotive Partners, an arrangement that had been handled through a private firm and was not publicly disclosed. It described a visit to the Portland showroom the previous morning. It described, without embellishment and with very specific detail, what had occurred. The initial assessment, the redirection to the floor manager's escalation, the request to leave. It noted that the investor had visited the showroom not to conduct any formal review, but simply to purchase a vehicle. It noted that this would no longer be possible, as the investor would be withdrawing from the equity arrangement in full and had instructed their firm to begin that process. It closed with a single paragraph. I want to be clear that this decision is not about money. The withdrawal is significant, but that's not the point. The point is that your Portland showroom turned away a customer because of what he was wearing. That's a values problem. Values problems don't get fixed with training modules or policy. They get fixed when leadership decides they actually matter. I hope yours does. I have no interest in being part of a company where they don't. It was signed with initials only. The CEO of Apex Automotive Partners, a man named Gerald Foster, read the email 3 times. Then he picked up his phone and called the general manager of the Portland showroom, a woman named Diane Hollister, who had been the GM for 4 years and ran a tight operation and had absolutely no idea what had happened on her floor the previous morning, because no one had told her. Diane listened to Gerald's summary. Then she asked for the security footage from the previous day. She watched 47 minutes of it. She called Gerald back and said 4 words. I'll handle it. Darren Webb was called into Diane Hollister's office at 9:15 a.m. He arrived with the specific energy of a man who believes he is going to be asked to explain a misunderstanding. He was not asked to explain a misunderstanding. He was shown the footage. He watched himself conduct the visual assessment. He watched Sandra's redirection. He watched himself arrive and deliver the suggestion that a customer might be more comfortable somewhere else. He watched himself, in the footage, suggest that the customer leave. He sat in the chair across from Diane's desk and watched the version of himself that had existed on that floor 24 hours ago, and could not, when it was right there in front of him, find any version of events in which what he had done was acceptable. The customer, Diane said, was a private investor in this company, 20% equity through Apex. He came in to buy a car. He left because your floor made him feel unwelcome. And now we're losing the investment. She paused. But I want you to hear me when I tell you that the investment is not the main issue. Darren looked at her. The main issue, she said, is that a person walked through our doors and was treated as though they didn't deserve to be here based on what they were wearing. That would be unacceptable if he were a teacher on a teacher's salary. It would be unacceptable if he were a delivery driver. It is not somehow more serious because he turned out to be wealthy. The problem existed the moment you looked at him and decided the rest. Darren didn't say anything. What would you have done differently? Diane said. If he had been wearing a suit? The question sat in the room. Darren knew the answer. He had known it since he had watched the footage. He had known it on some level he wasn't proud of, even as he had been doing it, because there was a version of him that had watched himself walk across that floor and known, in real time, what he was doing and why, and had done it anyway because it was the kind of thing his environment had always rewarded before. Everything, he said finally. Diane nodded, yes. Darren was suspended for 3 weeks, placed on a formal performance review, required to complete a series of sessions with an organizational consultant that the company brought in specifically for this. Not a checkbox exercise, but a real engagement with the question of how bias operates in sales environments and what it costs, not just in investment terms, but in terms of the people who walk through doors and are told, without a word being said explicitly. Sandra received a formal warning and was placed in a supervised mentorship program for 90 days. She completed it without She was, to her credit, the first person in the room to say out loud, when Diane sat with the floor team, "I knew when I redirected him." I didn't stop myself because I didn't think it mattered. I was wrong about what matters. Marcus was given a commendation and a raise. He didn't make a big deal of it. When his coworkers asked him later how he'd found the nerve to just walk up like that, he said, "I don't know. I just thought, what would I want someone to do if that was happening to me?" 3 weeks after the incident, Keanu Reeves received a call from Gerald Foster. He listened. He said little. At the end of the call, he asked one question: what changed? Gerald told him about Diane Hollister, about what she had done and how, about the sessions with the consultant, about Marcus and the commendation, about Sandra and the... Keanu was quiet for a moment. "She handled it right," he said. "We'd like to rebuild the relationship," Gerald said. "We understand if that's not possible, but we wanted you to know what we did." Another pause. "I'm going to be in Portland again in a few weeks," Keanu said. "If Marcus is still there, I'd like to buy a car from him." Gerald said he would make sure of it. 2 weeks later, Keanu walked back into the Cascade Motor Group showroom on 5th Avenue in Portland. It was a Tuesday morning. He was wearing jeans and a gray jacket, same bag over the same shoulder. He had not changed what he was wearing or how he carried himself, or any of the things that had told a floor manager, the first time, that he didn't belong in this particular room. Marcus was at his desk. He looked up. He stood up. "Good morning," without the particular electricity of recognition, and without the particular performance of someone who knows they are being observed. The way you say it to someone you're genuinely glad to see. "Good morning," Keanu said. He bought the Meridian Touring, dark gray, the one he had wanted to look at the first time. He paid cash, which took a little processing time, during which he and Marcus talked about the Pacific Northwest in October, about good roads for long drives, about a stretch of Highway 30 along the Columbia River that Marcus had done twice, and recommended. It was by any external measure an ordinary transaction. It was not, in the way things like this work, ordinary at all. There is a thing that happens in sales environments, and really in any environment that runs on quick assessment, on surface reading, on the fast categorization of people into useful and not useful, worth time and not worth time, where the system starts to feel like you do it enough times, you build enough pattern recognition. You learn to read a room quickly and you develop confidence in those readings, and eventually the confidence starts to feel like accuracy. And you stop checking, and that's when the cost becomes invisible. Not just the cost of losing an investor who happened to also be a person you turned away. That cost is legible. It shows up in a spreadsheet. The invisible cost is the one that doesn't show up anywhere. It's every person who walked into that showroom before this particular Tuesday and got the same assessment and walked back out and went somewhere else. Sore, went nowhere at all, who didn't have an equity stake or a public profile or any mechanism by which the room would eventually correct itself and recognize what it had done, who just left, carrying the weight of having been told, without words, that they weren't the right kind of person for this particular room. That cost never appears in any ledger, but it's Darren Webb sat in his sessions with the organizational consultant and was asked, more than once, to think about that. To think not about the specific incident that had landed him there, but about the pattern underneath it, the habit of assessment, the confidence it produced, the things it had cost over time that he had never had to account for because the people it cost hadn't been in any position to make him. It was uncomfortable work. He did it anyway. He came back to the floor after his suspension in a specific way that people come back. After they were forced to look honestly at something they've been doing, without looking honestly at it. Not transformed, not suddenly free of the habits of a career, but different enough to catch himself, different enough to pause in the 4 seconds between seeing someone and deciding who they are, and use that pause the way it's meant to be used. He would describe it later, in a way that surprised him with its simplicity, as just trying to see people before I sort them. Just that. Nothing more complicated. Just looking at a person like they're a person before you decide what category they belong. He couldn't always do it. Old habits are old precisely because they have been practiced long enough to feel automatic. And the trying, it turned out, was enough to make a difference that the people on the receiving end could feel. Marcus got a message about 6 weeks after the incident. It came through the dealership's general inquiry system, which meant it had been sent deliberately through an official channel, rather than directly, which meant the sender had wanted it. It read, I wanted to follow up from my visit in October. I bought a car from Marcus. He was excellent. He treated me like a person who had come in to buy a car, which is what I was. That should be the standard. It isn't always. When it is, it matters more than most people realize. There was no name. Marcus read it twice, printed it out and put it in his desk drawer, which he would later describe as not something I usually do, but it felt like something I should keep. He kept it because it said the thing that he had been trying to articulate since the first morning, since he had watched what was happening across the showroom floor, and made the decision to walk over. The standard. Treating someone like a person who had come in to do exactly what they said they had come in to do. Nothing more complicated than that. No fast assessment of whether they looked the part. No redirection towards something more in their supposed range. No polite invitation to try their luck somewhere. Just, you came in for a car, let me show you some cars. It sounds simple. It is simple. It is apparently also the kind of thing that requires a conscious effort to maintain. Because the environment doesn't always support it, and the shortcuts feel like efficiency, and the consequences of the shortcuts are usually invisible until, one day, they are. Marcus kept the printed message in his desk. On days when the environment made the shortcut feel easy, he opened the drawer and read it. It helped. Some lessons don't arrive the way you expect them to. Darren Webb had expected, if a lesson like this ever came for him, and some part of him had always known, somewhere below the confidence, that it would feel more like punishment and less like understanding. That it would be something done to him rather than something that arrived inside him. It wasn't quite like that. It was more like being shown a room you had been in for years, from an angle you had never stood at before. The same room, the same things inside it. But from the new angle, things that had been invisible became visible, and once you saw them, you couldn't unsee them. He thought about a lot of people. Specific faces, some of them. Customers who had come in wearing the wrong clothes and been gently pointed elsewhere. People who had smiled at the redirection and said, thank you, as though being turned away was something they owed gratitude for. People who had simply left without saying anything. their faces arranged into the specific expression of someone who has absorbed something and decided not to spend energy. He thought about what he had taken from them. Not money, not an opportunity necessarily, though sometimes that too. He had taken the basic thing, the assumption that they were worth seeing properly. That's what the assessment had taken, every single time. The assumption that a person who walked into a room deserved to be seen as a person, rather than categorized as a type. It costs nothing to extend that assumption. Literally nothing. It doesn't require any training or any special effort or any It just requires the decision, made every time and renewed every time, to look at a person before you sort them. That's the whole lesson. It fits in a sentence. It takes a lifetime to practice. Keanu drove north out of Portland on a Thursday morning in October, the Meridian touring loaded with what he needed for 2 weeks on the road. The Columbia River caught the early light and held it in a way that made the drive feel larger than the car, larger than the road, larger than all the ordinary things that the day was technically made of. He wasn't thinking about the showroom. He wasn't thinking about investment stakes or equity arrangements or any of the mechanisms by which the story had eventually corrected. He was thinking about Marcus, about the specific decision Marcus had made in the 3 seconds between watching what was happening and choosing to walk, the decision that had cost him nothing except the willingness to see clearly and act on what he saw. That decision had done more than anything else in the whole sequence, more than the email to corporate, more than the footage, more than the suspension and the sessions and the formal review. All of those things were consequences of what Marcus had done. But Marcus had acted before any consequences were visible, before there was any indication that the situation had a correctable trajectory. He had just looked at a person being treated like they didn't belong and decided, not on my watch. Not in so many words. He probably wouldn't have said it like that. But that was the thing he had done. Keanu drove north through the gorge and thought about how often that decision is available. Every day, in rooms of all kinds, that decision is available to someone, usually several, and most of the time, most of them take the shortcut, not because they're bad people, but because the environment supports the shortcut and makes the alternative feel risky. It doesn't have to be that way. It just needs someone to go first. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And, of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you.